Okay, so Guardian Druid. I went from 30 something to 80. Wanted to take advantage of the anniversary event. So I ended up doing mostly classic time walking. I did a few other things. I did some of the anniversary event quests to get gear. When I did hit 80, I did the heritage armor quest line at 50, things like that. So I did do a few other things, but mostly um, level doing time walking. And then I've done some world quests, some rep grind stuff, some regular dungeons, doing like the weekly quests, and things like that. I don't think I've done time walking since I've hit 80. No, I think I've been no, I think I've been doing those on other characters to actually get the gear on the appropriate character. So, or my character that I've been doing Mythic Plus on. So, um, that being said, now I've kind of hit a lull where I'm not really doing a whole lot on my Guardian at the moment. I'm kind of bouncing around tunes, doing a few different things. So I wanted to kind of go over everything. I'm going to mainly focus on the rotation because I feel like that will explain everything better. Um, the talents are hard to specifically say what's good and what's not depending on what type of build you are trying to go for. Because bear in mind that Druid does have 4 specs and they do overlap quite a bit and they borrow abilities from each other, and one spec might change how something works from how another spec uses it. So I will go into kind of why I spec'd into certain things. For the most part, though, I'm going to stick to the rotation and kind of what works with each ability. I feel like that's a better way to do it. I like doing it that way. Um, that being said, I will say, before I forget, that um, Guardian is maybe one of the more forgiving tank specs if you hit the wrong button or somehow in some way mess up after you've pulled. Um, you can just kind of start running through your rotation again, and everything seems to kind of level back out fairly quickly. So, um, or without any noticeable difference. I approached this so you kind of understand my thinking and kind of why I have things set up like I do. Um, like my um, Death Knights, because I've done probably the most tanking overall as Blood, and I tend to prefer um, Blood Death Knight tank over the others that I've played generally. Although Guardian is coming pretty close. Um, and also, I found that um, if you are familiar with a another class or another that does a similar role, like healing, for example, is normally what I do. A lot of about half the spells that every healer has are almost exactly the same. And then the other half are the class spec specific abilities. So having kind of a reference point kind of helps you understand what abilities do and kind of helps you put them where you might actually use them instead of putting something somewhere where you might forget it, never use it, and then wonder why you keep dying if you're a tank, or why you can't heal anyone if you're a healer. So that was kind of my thinking. So I will kind of run through the rotation. That is why I came to Borderless, which I did notice something kind of funny as a side note. So if you come over here to the guard and you go to points of interest and you ask where the training dummies are, so it gives you this kind of long explanation of where you need to go. It's literally right in front of him, which I just thought was kind of funny. That has no bearing on anything, of course. I just kind of thought that was funny. Um, so I will start with Swipe, Thrash to get the bleed effect out, Maul, which does more damage with bleed, and then one or two uses of Maul. I'll get into why here momentarily. And then basically rinse and repeat. So Swipe, Thrash, Maul, and that's pretty much it. So that is kind of how I handle trash. If I am running through a single target rotation, Swipe, Thrash, Maul, Moonfire, and then basically swipe until I've ran out of rage for the most part. And that is pretty much it. Now, kind of why everything was proccing and why I use them in that order. Um, so as I said, started setting this up how I would have set up my Death Knight, which obviously they're different classes, different specs, so you can't do that. But there are, again, kind of similar abilities. Um, so on my Death Knight, I would have started with Bone Shield, Blood Boil with 2 charges, um, Death Strike, Heart Strike, Death and Decay, and then the spell that they have now that spreads your disease. And that is pretty much it. 6 abilities. That is it with mastery that Death Knights have, which I also am very fond of the mastery that Guardian Druids have. That's one reason why I wanted to kind of level 1 and play around. Um, they seem to be the better tanks in, especially like raids and things like that. Druids and monks, I've always seen consistently throughout various expansions, have always been like the last player standing when things go south in dungeons or raids. Um, so obviously don't have Bone Shield. So what I had originally started out with was trying to use Bristle Fur, which causes you to generate rage based on damage taken for 8 seconds. In the past, rage has not been something that I have been fond of. I play a lot of mana classes, um, play a fair amount of hunter with focus. Of course, energy is fine, don't have any issues with that with rogue or monk. Um, but rage was always something that I always kind of had issues with because you never seemed to generate enough of it when you needed it. That is not the case now. I tried using this. The cooldown was too long. There was no reason for it. I have no issues generating rage. So you don't need it. I switched this out quite early on. Again, kind of started around level 30. Um, this was a character that I actually started way back when they connected the servers, or they started to connect the servers. And I started it to mainly hold name, which I ended up changing anyway when I did a race change. And I wanted to call Terran. And um, you may or may not know that you no longer need to level a allied race from level 10, which allied races start to level 50 in order to get the Heritage Armor. You can race change them, you can boost them, you can do all that. I looked into it before I did anything. Um, so that was why I had a Druid. It was just going to sit there. I have another main Druid that I typically do a lot of, like the healing, or typically it's always been healing and balance. I did set up Feral in Dragonflight and did some different things with Feral, but really haven't done much with Guardian. So what I've been doing with the allied races is kind of picking a spec that I don't normally play, because I am still very much the dual spec kind of. I remember having to go and purchase it, and you could only play two. So a lot of classes I only stick to two specs on, even now. So with the allied races, what I've been doing is picking like one spec, and that's the spec they play. Is whatever spec I play the least on my main class. So, um, that being said, if you were wondering why I started leveling at 30, that's why. So I was trying to stay away from Barbs, because Barbs was one of the abilities that when the stat squish happened, coincidentally, in Battle for Azeroth, um, this was one of the abilities that really suffered from that, because the damage was so low, the effect was so low that it didn't really do anything. At level 30, the almost 4,000 damage that this does from each attack was like 17. That was it. And the bark skin effect was like 15. So it really was not a good ability. Now it's decent. It's still not great, but it's decent. Um, so from there, I went ahead and just swapped it out with Swipe as far as the rotation is concerned. Getting back to that. So I use Swipe for threat, basically, when I'm trying to pull trash, because it has no cost for anything. You can use it as many times as you'd like. Um, so I'll usually use it once or twice to pull trash to me, and then I will use Thrash. I will also use it as kind of a filler ability. Then I'll use Thrash to apply the bleed. So Guardian does work around bleed effects, in the same way that people joke about, or compare, say how like a Shadow Priest is kind of a wannabe Warlock. Um, I feel like you could say that Guardian Druids are kind of a wannabe warrior, or at least that's the way they've always been set up, which I feel like is a bit unfair to Guardian. Um, and in the same way that a warrior has mortal wounds and bleeds and all of that, you have the same thing with um, Guardian, not unlike Death Knight and their diseases, um, in fact. So I will use Thrash to get the bleed out. This does stack, which is nice. And then I will skip and go to Mangle, because Mangle will do more damage against targets with bleed. And then I will use Maul. Now, when you get into hero talents, you can pick. I went with Druid of the Claw. Tried out Elun's Chosen. I tried so many things to make Moonfire work in more of a regular capacity, and it just is not going to happen. Um, so when you take that, you get Maul turns into an AoE ability. And then you can take another ability here. Let me see which one it is. Um, that will automatically. Let's see here. Maul. turn. There we go. Your first use of Mangle after entering combat makes your next Maul become Revenge. So that is another AoE that has a bleed. Two enemies in front of you. Does it? Hold on here. Let me double check. Does it have a bleed or is it just an AoE? Oh, I guess it's just an AoE. My mistake. Nevertheless, another AoE. So that's why I said I kind of use one or two uses of Maul. Just depends on the situation. Um, and then from there, it's basically just rinse and repeat. The only thing I do different for a single target is I use Mangle, and then I use Moonfire. I will use Moonfire to pull as an opener for a boss in a dungeon. I'll also just kind of keep it up for single target damage. There are talents that you can take that work with Moonfire. They are... It really doesn't change it all that much. Chance to reset the cooldown of Mangle, yes. Yeah, Moonfire reduces the damage dealt to you by 10%. Your direct damage melee abilities against enemies affected by Moonfire cause them to burn for an additional 20% arcane damage. I think that's part of the problem, is this is the only ability you have that actually uses arcane damage. Everything else I'm pretty sure just does nature damage. Or physical damage, so yeah. Yeah, and then of course you have a whole hero talent section devoted to it. So depending on how you, again, kind of depending on how you set up your talents, you may find more use out of that. As I was leveling and kind of playing around with the talents a bit, I never noticed much of a difference. If they gave this some sort of AoE effect, I feel like you might use it more. But just for single target damage, I'm not going to stop and apply it to a trash pull every one. So it just made more sense to use it for single target. And then I will go back to Maul and basically just use Maul until I run out of rage for the most part. And that is pretty much it, and that works perfectly fine. In addition to that, so one thing I didn't do, so there were a couple things I didn't take because I didn't want to do a wannabe warrior kind of setup or a setup like I've had before. So I didn't take, most notably, I didn't take Iron Fur. If you want to know how this works, think Pain. Basically works the same way. Of all the dungeons I ran, there was only one where anybody even mentioned this, and I think it was a combination of I had heirloom armor that was about maxed out. And I think so. I think it was partially me and partially the healer. So I think it was a combination of things. Other than that, did perfectly fine. I've kind of compensated a bit for not taking this. The other thing I didn't take was Wild Charge because I didn't want the charge to an enemy, immobilizing them for 4 seconds. I didn't want to go through all that. I've tried using it and it's just kind of clunky. So Instead, I took Tiger Dash, so I can always be in front of the group if I'm not, or get around the dungeon a lot quicker. Bearing in mind, I said classic time walking. Some of those are still pretty long, and they've even divided some of the longer ones up into smaller ones now. Um, so yeah, I think those were like the two main ones. So you will have things that proc. You unlike other classes and specs, you don't have to interrupt your rotation to use something that procs. The only exception to that is regrowth, because regrowth, when it procs, is the only time it works in your bear form. If you try to use it with when it doesn't proc, that's what happens. Um, and that is because of this talent. When you take non-periodic damage, you have a chance equal to your critical strike chance, which I will get into stats. Um, to cause your next regrowth to heal for an additional 130% and be instant, free, and castable in all forms for 30 seconds. This effect cannot occur more than once every 20 seconds, which is actually more than enough. That is the only exception that you want to break your rotation, is to use regrowth. You do also have frenzied regeneration, which I've tried to use in the past as like the main heal for Guardian. It just doesn't seem to work all that well. I'm not 100% sure why. I think because it's expecting you to do um, something else. It heals you for 20% health, which is fine, over 3 seconds. That's fine. And increases healing received. But you don't have another way to receive healing if you don't have a healer. Um, and using regrowth is a talent. Granted, it's a high up talent, so you'd almost have to take it. If you manage not to take this, you would have no other way of healing unless you were like an alchemist or something. Um, So I do use it sparingly. There was a talent, well-honed instincts. When you fall below 40% health, you cast frenzied regeneration up to once every 120 seconds. That is about the most I use it, is from that talent. If I'm in a group where the healer seems to be struggling, I will try to keep it on one charge. Keep one charge as kind of an emergency. I will also use it with renewal. I like using it with renewal because renewal on its own, even though it heals you for 30% of your health, doesn't feel like it does that much, at least for a tank. So using it with frenzied regeneration seems to give it just a bit of a boost. Um, and then that seems to help. The other thing is kind of your cooldown. So there are a few different things you can do. This is where, again, kind of the talents are set up a bit weird. So you have 3 of these Berserk abilities. So the one I took, Go Berserk for 15 seconds, increases haste by 15% and reduces the rage cost of Maul by 50%. So basically single target damage. You use it and then just spam Maul, and that will do quite a bit of damage. This is your biggest, hardest hitting ability. So the other ones are Go Berserk for 15 seconds, reducing the cooldown of Mangle, Thrash, and Growl by 50%. Couldn't really see the point in this. Mangle and Thrash don't have that long a cooldown, and you shouldn't be using Growl that often. That you need a 3-minute cooldown for an 8-second ability. And finally, go Berserk for 15 seconds, reducing the cooldown of Frenzied Regeneration by 100% and cost of Iron Fur by 50%. So, already went over Iron Fur. I don't use Frenzied Regeneration enough to use it. Um, there are a lot of abilities that work with Iron Fur, so you do have options there if it's something you choose to use. Um, so I just went with this just to, it works perfectly fine. I do think they could shorten the cooldown a bit, because 3 minutes does seem a bit long. I think 2.5 or just a flat 2 minutes would work better, personally. Um, I guess they kind of had to standardize all three of them. Um, but that's the only thing I would say. The 3 minute cooldown does seem a bit long, but I only noticed that doing like world quests and things like that. So I am doing things a bit quicker. So for a dungeon or a raid, 3 minutes is probably fine to. By the time you get from one point to another and you get through trash and all of that. The other thing is kind of the bottom of the tree was kind of played around with what to take. As I said, I tried making Moonfire more, working it into the rotation, having it do a little more. It just didn't work. You can take quite a few different things with Moonfire. I think I took a couple here. Um, yeah, so Gore, Moonfire, 15% chance to reset the cooldown on Mangle, and cause it to generate an additional 4 rage. Your direct damage, melee abilities against targets affected by Moonfire cause them to burn for an additional 20% arcane damage. Moonfire reduces damage dealt to you by 10%. So, not terrible abilities, minor ones here and there. You can really set this up where it does a lot. I couldn't really see the point. It didn't really go down this side of the tree, as you can see there. So I said that to say I tried Lunar Beam first, because this is, outside of Moonfire, this is the only thing you have that does arcane damage. Everything else does either nature or physical damage. Um, so took Lunar Beam, thinking maybe there's some way of increases your mastery. I thought, well, that's good, because mastery for Guardian is increases your maximum health, healing received, also increases attack power, so not bad. There's also lightning reflexes. You gain dodge equal to 100% of your critical strike from gear. So just to mention that while we're here. Yeah. Um, so I thought there was maybe a way to get some synergy out of Lunar Beam. There wasn't. So I tried Raise first. So Raise is kind of the AoE, um, bottom tier talent. And then Pulverize is kind of the single target um, ability. Tried them both. Really tried Raise. Thought, okay, more AoE for a tank is not a terrible thing. Just did not work all that well. It just didn't work in with the rotation all that well. Same thing with Pulverize. I don't need a lot of single target damage. You just have to hold threat. So, in that regard, Moonfire does work well. It does give you a bit of extra damage. Um, and it does cause you to do extra damage. So, that works perfectly fine. I ended up going with Rage as a sleeper, which I skipped over because it had a 1 minute cooldown on a effect that only lasted for 8 seconds, so it didn't seem all that good. However, the 1 minute cooldown is really not an issue, and it does multiple things. So it preventing 20% of all damage you take, increasing your damage done by 15%, granting you 20% leech, and reflecting nature damage back to your attacker. So the leech and the reflecting damage are typically when I use it. That's typically when I think of to use it. Everything it does is good. Those two in particular, I would say, are about the best, and it works well with bark skin. If we go back up to barbs here, so it does a base amount of damage, and then if you activate bark skin, it does additional damage to nearby enemies for 1 second. So not too bad. I will use them together. I will use them separately. It just depends. So in place of Iron Fur, um, I will use Frenzied Regeneration with Renewal. I will use Rage of the Sleeper for the leech, for the damage. I will use Bark Skin. When I was doing World Quest, I kind of alternated between these two, and that seemed to work well. I had no trouble keeping my health up or anything else during World Quest, and I'm only just now hit 575 when I got. What did I get? I don't specifically remember now. But just now when I came here to do this, I opened a chest and just now reached 575, and I've had no issue doing damage, no issue. I've been able to keep my health up fighting rares. So, um, been a little more slow going, obviously, because they're rares and this is still end game. But yeah, been able to hold my own doing that. So I think there's something to this. Um, could probably be fleshed out a bit more. Um, so that being said, I don't really use survival instincts. Unfortunately, you kind of have to take it. Because I wanted the talent mangle deals 20% additional damage against bleed targets. So kind of had to take things I didn't want for things I did want. You might have noticed I spec'd into Feral a bit here. I took Rake. That's because I wanted Feline Swiftness. Increases your movement speed by 15%. Also spec'd into Balanced a bit to get Starfire. Um, yeah, Starfire, Star Surge, Sunfire, improved Sunfire. So these do, um, yeah. So Starfire is AoE, Sunfire with improved Sunfire is AoE, and then just Star Surge is just single target damage. So I might probably going to be doing some farming. So wanted AoE just to kind of speed the process up, and there really wasn't much else to spend it on. Um, yeah, I think that was pretty much it for the talents. I mean, they're pretty self-explanatory. I just kind of took things like made sure I had Skull Bash, um, Mangle and Maul, cause an infected wound on the target, reducing their movement speed by 50% for 12 seconds. So yeah, just kind of went through, took anything I thought would help. Um, I imagine the talents are going to vary wildly depending on, again, kind of what you're trying to set up for Guardian, what you've played for Guardian. in the past, or what you've played for Druid, I should say. Excuse me. Um, and yeah, so that was pretty much it. So as far as like the stats go, I've tried to keep my critical strike at least 20%. That's where it was when I started leveling at 30 something. Um, so I've tried to keep it at 20%, which has been fairly easy because everything has critical strike on it. Um, Haste has went up. That's fine. I want to get my mastery higher. I've done some War Within dungeons for the weekly reputation quest or for one thing or another. Um, and I've done fine. I think I would do better. I think you'd be a bit more self sufficient in group situations if my mastery was a bit higher. Um, Versatility kind of leaned towards that when I had gear that didn't have anything else I wanted, or when I could. Leech, speed, dodge, obviously. Went over that. So, yeah, keep your critical strike about 20% or so. Wouldn't let it fall much past that. Like, I think 15% would be too low. Um, to get um, to get everything to work. I've had this as high as I think 20, 25, maybe just over 25. Um, you will get regrowth to proc enough. The downside is you can't get it to proc when you need it. Obviously, you can't use it when you need it, but the initial heal is what you want, and then the healing over time doesn't hurt. So I've been able to use this just back to back to back um, in the right situation. It also does matter. Um, I've noticed it does seem to matter how many um, enemies you have around you as well. So, not entirely sure it yeah, when you take non-periodic damage. So that might have something to do with it. More enemies means there's more of a chance based on your critical strike. So 25% would be theoretically a 1 in 5, 1 in 4, excuse me. 1 in 4 chance to proc regrowth, which would be about right, I would say. Um, yeah, and I think that is about it as far as like CC and the other abilities go. I took Stampeding Roar again just to. I got this before I got Tiger Dash. Yeah. So took it just to not only keep me in front of the group, but to also help move the group along quicker. Um, took Vortex because Vortex is annoying if you've ever played PvP. Took Soothe to dispel enrage effects. Having done Mythic Plus, I will say I do use the dispel for enrage effects more often. I don't think I took remove corruption. I did not. Yeah, leave that to the healer. So you probably might want to take this if you're going to do like Mythic Plus or endgame content or anything like that. It helps to have that. Definitely did take Skull Bash just because that is something that is more of a tank responsibility. And yeah, that is pretty much it. I'm used to having a knockback, so I took Typhoon. My Shaman has one. My Invoker has one. I'm just kind of used to having it. Don't use it all that often, but when you do need it, you do need it. So, it seemed like something worth taking. And with that, I think that's pretty much everything. I do have Haymaker, which is one of my racials. So this does damage and stuns and knocks the target back, which is actually kind of annoying. The knockback. I wish they would take the knockback off. I'm fine with the damage and the stun, but the knockback is kind of annoying. And with that, yeah. So there you go.